Over the years here at VINwiki, we've had some insane stolen car stories, and today we've compiled our top 10 into a single video for you to enjoy. So I hope that you enjoy hearing about it. I know in the moment, these were very, very difficult situations for all parties involved. But whatever you're going through in life, our sponsor today, BetterHelp, can help you through that. Last year, I was going through some stuff in life, and I just wanted kind of a different perspective to help me look at my problem and move past it. And I used BetterHelp because it was so easy to log on to their phone app or their website, and I was able to answer a few questions about what I was going through, and they partnered me with the perfect therapist that had an expertise in the area that I was struggling with. And so whether it's your job or a relationship or depression, anxiety, whatever it is that you're going through, BetterHelp has a nationwide network of professionals with amazing experience that can help you get through, get past, and move on from whatever it is that you're going through in life. And the great thing is that you can communicate with your therapist using messaging, voice call, video chat, whatever makes you comfortable. And the whole process is so easy. They're all about making it easier and more affordable than ever to access the therapy and the counseling that you're looking for. So check them out now at betterhelp.com/VINwiki to thank them for their support of the channel and find the help you need with BetterHelp.
So to date at Curated, we have owned probably something like 8 or 9, maybe 11 Mira SVs, which is quite astonishing because there's only 150 in the world and there's probably only 120 or 130 left. Many were destroyed, they caught fire. It's really sort of the Mira SV because of my dad and his car and my passion for the cars. It's really sort of become this cornerstone of the business. We got a call from a very, very well-respected collector and dealer. I'd basically say he's almost retired now, but this is someone that's owned numerous Mira SVs and really is a legend in the industry. He called my dad first. They've known each other for 20, 30 years. And he said, hey, I think I found a Mira SV in like the jungle in Brazil. And I'd never heard of a Mira SV being in Brazil. There's actually a great photo of a Mira that was, I think it was a P400 or an S, a green car in Brazil, somewhere in Rio. So there's a cool photo. You could see the hills and whatnot and mountains. But I'd never heard of an SV in Brazil. So I started trying to do some research. I really couldn't find anything. He basically said, I've got a relationship with this gentleman in Brazil. I've got a relationship with the owner. The father died. The son is now taking possession of the car, and the car is basically in pieces. It's one of those stories when you first hear it, you don't know if you actually believe it until you see it. Now, a few years ago, when we had the rental car company, we had this incredible young guy, Pedro. He came from Brazil. He interned with us. At the time, Lulavi, our rental car company, rented to a lot of Brazilian clients coming to Miami. So Pedro was Portuguese speaking. He knew a lot about the car community in Brazil. So he was an incredible asset to our business at the time. Now, unfortunately, Pedro had to go back to Brazil, and he's sort of been stuck there because visa issues and things like that. And one day we hopefully can get Pedro back to the US, but we've used Pedro in a lot of ways to help us with different things in Brazil. And I immediately reached out to Pedro and I said, do you know where this city is? And he said, yeah, it's actually outside of Sao Paulo. So it's not really the jungle. But I said, do you mind going and sort of taking photos? We don't have photos of this car. We know about where it is. Do you mind going and inspecting this car? Now, Pedro had no idea where the chassis numbers would be on a Mira, but I basically gave him like this diagram of, here's the front hood stamp, here's the rear hood stamp. There's 2 stamps on the door handles. There's a stamp on the rear trunk. And, you can't really fake those things. So, when you look at a Mira SV, you could pretty quickly tell, okay, that's a real car. It's, it's all there. So Pedro makes, I think he had to fly in or whatnot, and he makes the flight from his town in Brazil to this town outside of Sao Paulo. And he starts sending me photos. And my jaw is just on the floor because this Mira, which is, Mira SVs sell between $3 and $4 million, is absolutely in pieces. And it is just in the worst state of disrepair to the point where at some point someone had stripped the car and they'd left a lot of the metal bare. So there's corrosion, there's all these sorts of things. There's whatever's left of the interior, there's mold, there's rips, there's a wheel sitting on a box, there's carburetors over here, the hood is off it up against a wall, and this car is probably the worst state I've ever seen in a Mira that was still salvageable. I mean, it hadn't burned to the ground, but I can only imagine what it was going to take to restore this car. So, obviously, because we're a little nuts, we said, okay, we're interested. And we started to negotiate for this car. And at the time, the endeavor was sort of, I felt pretty comfortable because it was coming through someone that's so well respected in the industry. And, he said, okay, great. What we'll do is you send me a deposit. I'll send it to the owner. It'll lock up the car. And then what we'll try to do is get an inventory of all the parts. We'll get it delivered to the port, and then you can pay by escrow, or you can pay some, in some matter. And I forget the exact price, but it was well over $1 million. It might have been almost $2 million at the time. And listen, that's a lot of money to send to Brazil to someone you don't know. And, especially when a car's almost in boxes or in pieces. So a few weeks went by. We've sent our deposit at this point, and the car's starting to get, put together slowly. And about a month went by, and I was starting to get worried. I was like, hey, let's close this car. Let's wrap up this deal. And our friend that, was basically putting this deal together said, man, it's weird. I haven't heard from anyone. So another couple weeks go by, and again, I hear, no, we haven't heard anything. And now, because this was, a few years ago, we were still a young company. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a big company or a young company, you're worried about your deposit. Now I'm worried about my deposit. So starting to actually put some pressure, and I'm saying, hey, do I need to send someone in Brazil? Do I need to call the authorities in Brazil? Like, what do I actually need to do to either secure this car or get my money back? I actually called Pedro, and I said, hey, Pedro, can you stop by this place again? We'll pay for your plane ticket, fly back. And Pedro goes, and he's greeted by this gentleman at this warehouse area, and he's pretty rude this time. And he's like, you guys got to relax. We're going to get this car together. And he almost won't even let Pedro take new pictures of the car. He won't let him see the car or anything. Now I'm starting to get nervous. Now our deposit's at risk. And really, I was really excited about the car. I had started talking to two great collectors in Europe, and we're very transparent about the car. And we showed them all the photos, and we said this is a massive project. It could be $600,000-$700,000 to restore a car in this shape. But it is a cool example. It was originally one of the very rare silver Mira SVs. It was bought by a lawyer that actually lived in Portugal. And at some point, he left Portugal and he arrived in Brazil. And he actually drove this car in Brazil for a few years. And then at some point in the 80s, he decided he wanted it red. And that's when the car was stripped to bare metal. And unfortunately, just sat there for many, many years. Now, there was a belief that the car might have had a small fire. When we looked at the carburetors, they were a little dark, and that was sort of common of Miras in that period. So that could have been another reason the car was parked. But nonetheless, we were starting to dig for the history. It was a matching numbers car, which is obviously a plus. And we had these two gentlemen from Europe that were very interested in buying this car and telling the story with us and sort of unveiling it and doing this whole restoration together. More weeks went by, and now we were really worried. Pedro was turned away when he showed up to take more pictures, and now we were scared. And one day, a broker off Instagram starts sending me pictures of a Mira SV in Brazil. And now I'm pretty concerned because now this broker is offering me this car for more money than we had agreed and we had a contract to with deposit. So I immediately call our mutual friend who's basically handling this deal for us. And I said, listen, you've got to tell this gentleman now, the seller, the son of the former owner, that, he's got to send us our deposit back. He can't be offering this car around, A few weeks go by, and one day, out of nowhere, from California, our deposit arrives in the form of a wire. Now, I almost didn't want to actually believe that the deposit just arrived back because it was sort of sketchy how everything went down. So, I just sort of accepted it and said, okay, thank God we got our deposit back. We lost the car and, it is what it is. And the gentleman, very well-respected guy in between said, I apologize. I want you guys to have your, you've got your deposit back. And he told me that he actually received the deposit from the son and that, something had happened. They couldn't clear up I guess because the car had been off the road for so many years, there was registration fees owed and they couldn't clear up the tax situation. All these different things coming out of Brazil. And I'm hearing all these stories of basically him saying, I'm sorry, and, getting out of the deal. 4 months later, talking to a colleague, and he's telling me this insane story about a Mira SV. And I realized it's our Mira SV that we unfortunately could never purchase. And essentially, what happened was the son, the current owner of the car, while he was making excuses that he was in a fight with his sister and over the estate, and there was another excuse about registration, all these different excuses during the time he had our deposit, apparently had sold the car to a dealer out of Texas in the Midwest that had the car sold to someone else. Now, apparently he had sold the car for not too much more money, but a little bit more money. So he'd basically taken our deposit and then shopped the car to someone else, collected more money, and now he had their money. And I would say the most wild part of this story is apparently he had structured their deal the same as ours. So the deal was that they had sent him a deposit, and then the car would have to be assembled, and then the car would be moved to the port. And once the car was at the port, basically, they would send the rest of the money. So they actually got as far to have the car assembled. They got photos of the car assembled. I actually received those photos. The car was sitting in like some apartment building as like a bunch of parts put together. And they had received photos and word that the car got to the port, and they sent the whole amount of money, which I think was like $1.5 or $1.6 million. And basically, imagine they thought they had bought a Mira SV and the car was at the port. Well, apparently a day later or 2 days later, this Mira SV was stolen from the port. Now, the owner of the car is saying that, I don't know what happened. I don't have the car, and, I'm sorry, but it was stolen. I have nothing to do with that. So I can't even imagine what this dealer group was feeling out of Texas and the Midwest, because I would be freaking out. I know there's extradition laws and all these different things between the US and Brazil. The Brazilian legal system is different than the US legal system. So I can't even imagine what they were thinking, but they immediately hired a private investigator. And the private investigator flew to Brazil and he started doing research. And what he found out was that the owner, the actual son, the owner of the car, actually stole the car, paid someone to steal the car out of the port, took possession of the car, and was trying to resell the car again. Now, the crazy story is after trying to reach the owner and after trying to somehow reach the authorities in Brazil, this private investigator ends up making some friends with, I guess, authorities or police or whatnot in Brazil. And he's at some morning coffee shop one day and he's just having coffee. And I guess he's frustrated. He can't find the car. He can't find anything. And who is sitting next to him at this place is the owner of the Mira, who has now stolen the car, has their money, the car, and potentially my deposit money. And they basically force him at that moment into giving them the car. So they ended up retrieving the car. The car ended up going to Europe. There's actually a funny story. Apparently, when it arrived in Italy, a snake was in the car. And a snake came out and all the Italian workers freaked out because it's probably a snake from Brazil. The story goes that they ended up restoring the car, and the car's now, I think it's somewhere in Europe. And it was a beautiful restoration in silver and it was finished right. But I believe to this day that I actually never really got my deposit back. I actually think that the gentleman between us and the seller he had such a good reputation, and he probably felt very responsible that he actually sent us the money. I always found it weird that it came from a California attorney, not this Brazilian. Now, it is possible that the Brazilian sent the money back. Regardless, we were made whole. It was a very scary situation. I can't even imagine how scary it was for the other individuals. And since that point, I don't buy cars out of Brazil. And if I can't move a car at least once, or I can't verify that I can take some sort of possession or inspect a car at a dealer, I am not sending my money overseas.
So this one wasn't too long ago. I was working with Mattis, my police canine, and then we were working, it was evening watch. And earlier in the night, I didn't give much thought to it because as a canine unit, you're dispatched to only certain calls, like crimes in progress or types of calls where a canine can be utilized. Or they'll call for you, like if they want you to do a drug sniff or things like that. But I did hear a call go out about a heroin overdose. But that's not something I would typically respond to as a canine unit. It was at a residence. There was someone overdosed, and so they sent police to try to get there as quick as possible. We carry Narcan, and so we can a lot of times intervene and help out. And they also send EMS and fire. This so happened to be right across the street from the fire station on Webbridge Road. Fire station beat us there, but the person was deceased, and it seemed of an OD. And it was just like one of those calls. You hear come out, and it's unfortunate, but it happens quite often, sadly. About an hour after that call, there's another call at the church that's right across the street from where the person had OD'd. And it was a carjacking. Now, this is something that we don't get in Alpharetta often. This would be something in progress that a canine might be useful. right? So if there's a carjacking, you think, well, they steal a car. If there's a pursuit that ensues afterwards, then a canine could be useful, because if they jump out after terminating the pursuit, then a canine can track and be extremely useful in that situation. So this is something I had to, but it was delayed a little bit, and so we don't get the car in that location, but they gave out the description of the car. It was a Scion XB with a crack in the windshield, and it was a unique color. It was not something you always see. I think it was like a burnt orange Scion XB. And so we didn't find it at that moment, but I'm kind of thinking, okay, well, where are likely places it could go? And so I go out on a 400 southbound, south of the location that we were at. So I think south of Haynesbridge, and just kind of looking out. And this is later in the evening now. We're probably 2 a.m. So there's not a ton of cars that are on the road, and I can see basically everything that's going by. And we're getting to the point, though, that the time delay was so great that I was about to pack it up in, because if there was a carjacking, the guy is gone by now. Especially typically what happens is if there's a carjacking, they leave the area almost immediately. They want the car for a specific reason. And so I'm like, all right, we're 30 minutes delayed from when it actually happened. There's not very likely that he's out here. And then I see one more car coming down the road. What do you know? It's a burnt orange Scion XB with a crack in the windshield. So I asked dispatch one more time just to confirm the description of the car. And that's exactly what they give me. And they actually have a tag. And so I'm like, all right, well, let me pull out on 400 behind. And sure enough, same tag, same vehicle. I'm like, radio, I think I'm behind that vehicle. This is something you pursue, right? Because carjacking means that he pulled a weapon on someone and physically took possession of their vehicle. So we have a crime against a person and the theft of the motor vehicle. So this is a big deal. So I'm in it. There's cars that are coming to me, but the guy, as soon as he sees me, takes off. And so I'm in pursuit behind him, going southbound on 400. And we're in pursuit. I'm doing it. It's in the middle of the night. There is no one else on the road. It's just very easy to stay behind him. He's staying on 400. He gets off at the MARTA park and ride. And I'm like, oh yeah, this guy has no clue where he is. Like, the only thing he can do is either culminate the chase at the parking deck, which is a confined space. It's going to be easy to find him. Not a problem. Or he can turn back northbound to where all my units are coming from. Right? So this is great. But the guy makes a turn that surprises me, and he pulls into the parking deck. And it's, once again, this never happens, but he breaks through the guard arm, it goes flying through the air, and he starts driving up in the parking deck. I'm like, where are you gonna go? Right? And so I'm behind him, and I'm in a larger vehicle. I was in a Ford Explorer at the time, actually, and I wasn't a big fan because they moved me from a Chevy Tahoe, which was very spacious, and my dog Mattis is huge. He's a big dog. There's lots of equipment you have to carry in the back, bite suits, training aids, all kinds of things for canines that you have to have in the back. And by the way, he's a champ in the back, right? He's not barking. He's just chilling in the back as we're pursuing this guy. But we're in this Ford Explorer. It's a little bit tighter. I wasn't the biggest fan. It did great in the pursuit, though. It was, it had nice features like Bluetooth radio and all this other stuff that I was like, that's nice, but I don't think it's good enough for my dog. We start going up in this parking deck, and he starts slowing, and he's looking behind me to see if I'm still behind him. I'm like, oh, yeah, this is my opportunity. I hadn't been pit trained at that time, so I'm like, I'm just going to ram this car because, this is a great place. There's no other vehicles. We're on the 3rd level now, and so it was, I think, the middle of the week, so there weren't a lot of vehicles that were parked there. And so I'm like, this is the perfect opportunity to ram the vehicle, disable it, take the guy into custody. And so I punch the Ford Explorer, and I expected immediate response because that's what my Tahoe did. Ford Explorers kind of tell you to wait for a second, which I didn't know. And so I punched the accelerator to ram the guy, and the Ford Explorer is like, give me a second. And so the guy moves as I go to ram him, and I sideswipe a concrete pylon. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And this is all on the camera. I'm like, if this ends like this, I am in so much trouble, right? And I'm like, please don't let my car be disabled. Please don't let my car be disabled. And so it's still creeping. And apparently my maneuver confused the guy, right? Because he saw me disappear. Like, what is this guy doing? And so you can see him quizzically looking, and his vehicle stopped. He's like looking down where I should have been, and I'm not there anymore because I just hit a pylon over here. I also see a gun in his right hand. So I'm now on the other side of him because I just hit a pylon, and I have a little bit of momentum. And so Now the Explorer doesn't have to wait at all. And I just go full speed into the side of it. I'm like, I'm ending this. And I hit him, and I actually see the gun fly out of his hand. He jumps out of the vehicle and starts running. I jump out after him, and I have this great partner, police canine, with me who's faster than me and can catch this guy better than I can. And so I hit my door popper, which is this remote control on my door for it to fling open, and he knows he's supposed to run beside me. And so he jumps out and runs beside me, and the guy's running towards the elevator area of the MARTA park and ride, level 3. We start running, and I tell my dog, there's a few cars here sporadically, so I tell my dog, I give him the command to go apprehend, because like I said, he's faster than I am. He just kind of looks at me like, apprehend who? And I'm kind of getting upset. And then I realize, although I'm short, I can see over the vehicles. He can't see over the vehicles. And so he doesn't realize that we're chasing after someone. And so he just stays running by my side. And so the guy hits the stairwell and starts going down the stairwell. I'm right behind him. I'm going down the stairwell, but it's just far enough out of sight where Mattis doesn't see him. And so he goes down one level, goes to the door. I see the door closing. I come through. I go, and I caught him miraculously. And I tackle him to the ground, and I'm like, why isn't my dog engaged, right? And so I'm on top of this guy now. I have him on the ground. He's still fighting a little bit, and then I see my dog with a shoe in his mouth. I'm like, what? What happened? I look down at the guy's foot, and he's got one shoe on because Mattis took the other shoe. But I'm like, why did you just grab one shoe? That's unbelievable. Like, you should be holding on to the shoe on his foot. And so he's running around, and I tell him, spit the shoe, get in the fight. So he jumps into the fight, grabs the guy. Then I could take control of him. I put him in cuffs. He had like all kinds of needles and stuff that were in his pockets. He was actually trying to come over on me and stab me. Mattis stopped the fight, which was fantastic. And then I looked down at his foot. He's actually got 2 holes in the top of his foot from where Mattis, I thought I was just fast, but apparently Mattis grabbed his foot, and that's what actually slowed him down enough that I could tackle him, and that's why he was running around with the shoe. But that was probably the most exciting, with, Mattis jumping in the fray. And I think the best part of the story, when we came out and down, we were on level 3, but apparently on one side of the MARTA park and ride, there's different ramps. So most of my backup couldn't get to me. And then there were some Sandy Springs guys that actually were the first ones on scene, they were super helpful. They came in and helped me take custody of the guy. And then an employee of MARTA came out, law enforcement officer. And they had, no joke, they had a napkin and they had a sandwich in their hand. They're like, we were looking for you. We saw it on the cameras. And so that was kind of my favorite part, was this punctuation of someone running in with the napkin tucked into their uniform and a sandwich in their hand, but hastily got to me and helped me out with the end result. So.
Last reported stolen, Palermo, Italy, 1996, never seen again. As you know, Ed, I'm a car collector. I got a pretty significant collection, but a little bit of everything. Muscle cars, Porsches, Ferraris. But I've been searching for the Holy Grail, the F40. And looking, and I'm all over. There's a lot of international sites. Anamera, Cars and Classics, Mobile.de, which is German only. A lot of people don't know about those. They just go on Gurus or DuPont. And so on Anamera, there was an F40 that was significantly under the market at the time. About $250,000, but it's in Japan, which it's part of the reason, although Japanese collectors are very, very fastidious about their cars, which is a good thing. There's also not a lot of people that are willing to go all the way to Japan to look at a car. But I won't buy anything. I mean, I bought cheaper cars on eBay and stuff without actually going out, but I'm not going to spend close to $1 million without hands-on. I went with my wife, and who's significantly younger than me, but has what I've seen of everyone I met, the best BS meter I've ever seen. She's kept me out of so much trouble in deals by just saying, there's something wrong here. This guy makes me nervous. I just don't like it. But needless to say, this thing was cheap, and I didn't want to lose it. Next day, we hop on British Air. We fly out to Tokyo. We take the speed train to Osaka. We meet up with these 2 guys in a warehouse, huge empty warehouse except for the F40, which is sitting there. It's there, hands on. Now, it had some mods, some like HK springs put in it and some gas shocks, a couple of different things, nothing that couldn't be changed back. They were kind of pushy, and they were also whispering a lot in the corner. And after maybe 15 minutes, she says to me, let's get out of here. So what are you talking about? She goes, this car's stolen. So you're out of your mind. They only made 1,100 of them. No one's going to sell on an international market a stolen car where all you got to do is look at the serial number. I mean, it's impossible. So then they bring me a bunch of documents of supposed inspections and stuff, all in Japanese. I have no idea what they say. And I did not bring an interpreter, which was my bad. So then I told them, and they spoke a little bit of English, enough to understand. I said, I want to send the car to Ferrari Tokyo for PPI. Oh, no, car does not leave warehouse. You can bring mechanic here. I'm like, that's kind of weird. I said, if it's money, I'll pay for it. I'll put it on the trailer. I'll insure it. I'll pay for the PPI, whatever, but it's got to go to Tokyo. No, bring you a mechanic here. Anyone you want. Car's good. Don't worry about it. The money's good. They're even offering me a little less, but I'm getting a little nervous. When I put a car in play, I don't like other people to know that I'm interested in the car until I'm ready to pull the trigger. So I won't ask questions on one of the forums until it would be too late for anybody else to jump. So at this point, because I'm a little nervous, I post on Ferrari chat. So I post, does anybody know this serial number? And I don't remember the number anymore, so we'll just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. 5 minutes later, Marcel Massini, who's probably the foremost Ferrari historian ever, 5 minutes later, he writes, last reported stolen, Palermo, Italy, 1996, never seen again. Oh my God, this thing will not get out of Japan. Well, it may get out of Japan, but it's not getting in the States. And then, of course, when it gets in the States, they're going to hold it. It's stolen. I just told the guys, look, car's not for me, blah, blah, blah. I don't like the modifications. They went crazy. We have deal. I'm sorry with my fake accent. We have a deal. You came out here. I said, I'm not interested. We're leaving. Thank you very much. And of course, I wrote to Marcel immediately. Thank you. You saved me. But truth is, she really saved me because she called it in 10 minutes. I'm like, an insurance company had to have written a check for that. So they're going to want, if they know where it is now. So I called Palermo, Italy, the police department in Palermo, right? I'm like, I have information about a stolen car, right? No one answers the phone. Right? I'm like, all right, maybe it's siesta time, because, everything closes in Italy from 2 to 5. So, I take the time difference in account and I call to what would have been 9 a.m. there. No one answers the phone. And not a voice message either. So I tried maybe 5, 6 times. And I'm like, you know what? I don't know what would happen if I was reporting, a murder, but since they're not answering the phone, but I finally gave up. And look, possibly there would have been a reward as well. Would have been nice, but even cooler if I could have returned the car to its original owner. That's always a nice story. He gets his car back 20 years later with some upgrades. But as far as I know, it's still in Japan. But it's no longer for sale, so maybe somebody bought it in Japan. I was disappointed. Search didn't end. Kept looking. When you're collecting, it's an international market, except for maybe muscle cars and Corvettes, because those guys over there don't care. So every day I'm watching the euro, the pound, mostly the euro and the pound for fluctuations. So I found the car at DK Engineering, which part of what's important, especially after what I just learned, is reputation. And these guys, Harvey Stanley and the guys over at DK, have the most impeccable. I can't say enough about what stand-up guys these guys are. The car I'm looking at was 900,000 pounds, and the pound was $1.48. The car was basically $1.5 million. 7,000 kilometers, absolutely perfect. Redbug, Classic A, 2-owner car, just perfect. So I'm talking to Harvey Stanley about it. He goes, well, there's not a lot of room, et cetera, et cetera. The next day, Brexit hits. The pound goes from 148 to 120. Okay, I call Harvey. I said, Harvey, is the car still for sale? Yeah. Is it still 900,000 pounds? Yes. Talk about stand-up. I mean, they could have raised it the 25% spread and still gotten in U.S. dollars what they were going to get. But they didn't. They stuck to it. I flew out next day, put my hands on it. I know them, so I didn't have to do a PPI. And actually negotiated and got it for a little bit less. It did go up. It went to 121 when we closed the deal, which was still like, as soon as I got it here, it was worth $300,000, $400,000 more. Then, all right, the car had been sitting. I started up, starts making a funny noise. One of the turbos blew. The impellers are magnesium, so they're very brittle. So I took it to my local Ferrari dealer. They said, oh, we better replace both sides. It's going to be $44,000. I'm like, all right, look, you buy $1 million car. What are you going to do? But I called Harvey over at DK. I told him what happened. He says, you know what? We got 2 rebuilt ones on the shelves. Don't worry about it. They're on the way, which was just a fantastic thing. I will always do business with these guys. Sent it to Ferrari. They charged me a little bit of labor, to put them on. But now the car is dead perfect. So, of course, I want to drive it. I mean, it's the ultimate, but it's got 7,000 kilometers on it. And every kilometer you add is hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars. Not as much in Europe. In Europe, they drive the piss out of their cars, and they don't care. But here, I mean, mileage, they're so mileage sensitive. I would love to drive it every day, but I can't. But yeah, I have an F40, and it's in my warehouse, and we can touch it and look at it. But that's the extent of it.
Car had been taken from Leicester as a repayment of a debt that Paul owed somebody money because they'd invested in gold mines, lost their money, and he'd said to them, take this Lamborghini. So the mystery of the stolen Lamborghini Diablo 6-litre VT. This story gripped the UK scene, and we as Petronism, as myself, as the Lamborghini Club UK, we reached out to the strength, the power of social media to help us find our friend's stolen car. Now, sitting here in this seat, the other side of everything that happened, I can kind of reveal a lot of things that weren't revealed in the videos that we made for our YouTube at the time, because what we learned along the way was we couldn't fully disclose what was happening because of police investigations or because of our own investigations. So sat here now with the car pretty much complete, ready to go for paint, I can kind of tell the whole story. And it's great to be back here for you guys, giving you the full happenings and all the players in what became the stolen Lamborghini debacle. So if we trip back to early 2020, the car's in storage. A friend of ours, Alistair, had stored the car with somebody he'd met through a Lamborghini dealership. He'd met this guy, Paul Rutter, in the Leicestershire area, who had cars, had Bentleys, had Lamborghinis, and had space at his house to store the car. Alistair entrusted the car to him, no reason not to, and then the whole world was stopped. Dead on our tracks, COVID hit, we're all locked down throughout the world. The UK lockdown was quite severe, and as far as Alistair's concerned, the car's safe, and when the time comes, he could go grab the car and enjoy it once again. Fortunately for him, he had a Murcielago Roadster and the 6-litre VT Diablo. It meant that Diablo was kind of forgotten and he could still enjoy his Murcielago when the roads reopened. What happened was, end of July, August 2020, he received a letter from the UK Authority for Vehicles, DVLA, informing him that somebody had tried or had applied to place the V5, the logbook, the UK registration document, in their name. Meaning, hold up, something's happened here. You can apply to do that in the UK for £25. The registration document actually has it stated on it, this does not prove ownership, but for instance, there are reasons why you may have to apply for it. And when he saw this document, he was like, that's my car and I've not sold it or anything, and phoned up the guy that was storing it to be told, well, I thought you collected it. At that point, his whole world fell apart and everything started unfolding. We got involved on social media saying, hey, this yellow 6-litre VT Diablo has been stolen. Has anybody seen it? And we started a social media campaign. My page was quite small back then in mid-2020. but it was shared out, and the power of social media really started to take hold. We did have some people come back. What was happening in Leicestershire was the owner of the property that had stored the car literally just wiped his hands clean and said, I thought you'd collected it. And although the police had searched his property, which we found out during our investigation, they found nothing to evidence the fact that he was involved in any way. The keys for the car weren't found in his property, but the keys were given to him, and because Alistair had given him the keys, the insurance did not pay out. And that's really important because we've received loads of comments over the time of our YouTube series that insurance had paid out, he'd been covered, so why is everybody so worried about this poor man with the Lamborghini? The insurance didn't pay out, but the thing was, it was such a special car, 6-litre VT, extremely rare. So the next stage is we start receiving messages, and I get involved with petrol head, and an Instagram message come through, and we've actually got a video of the car in a barn with a G-Wagon, and we're told the car's going to be shipped out to Africa, we need to act quick, and we offer this guy a reward. At this point, when we inform the police, thinking we're doing the right thing, the police then turn their eyes to us, suggesting that somehow me and Alistair are involved in somehow trying to defraud an insurance company, or that we're involved with the position stealing of the car. The police turn their sights to the guy who supplied us with information is extortion, and therefore they're going after him for that rather than trying to consider where the cars are being stored. And so we've done everything possible. This guy off Instagram who messaged us has disappeared. The police are turned their sights to us, and then they've gone quiet. I've literally told the police to do one, get stuff, because there's no way I'm involved. I'm just trying to help a friend and doing what we do out of sheer friendship. Out of the blue, December the 29th, 2022. So literally 2 years and 4 months later, I'm home with the family. It's Christmas time, and I see my phone ring, and it's Alistair. And I literally answered it with 2 rings and, hey Alistair, how are you? No idea why he's called me at Christmas, because everybody's with their families. He goes, Shiro, you won't believe this. They found my car. I was like, sorry? Because they found my car in a disused cattle market car park in Yeovil, one of the most southern points of the UK, 2.5 years later. However, it has been stripped. The policeman in Yeovil, Somerset, Avon and Somerset Police Force, had been doing routine checks, come across a car covered with black material and a tarpaulin, checked it over, assumed it was a kit car, and ran the VIN number to find that it had been reported stolen in Leicestershire 2.5 years earlier. It was in fact Alistair's car. So that was promptly retrieved, taken into custody as it were, and checked for forensically for about a month. And then the whole power of social media kicked in again. We went down to the location within a couple of days with Scoop, my videographer, met Alistair there, and we filmed our first video appeal, episode 1. And it got quite dramatic in that video. We talked to local people. We tried to find out how or why this car would be here, but it'd been stripped. And what really hit us was the car hadn't been professionally stripped. And what I mean by professionally stripped is it still had the engine, big ticket item, still had the interior, but was missing doors, missing wheels. It had some Haman drift wheels on it. It was missing the headlights. Everything that was easily removable, bolt-onable, bolt-off, had been removed, but the wings, the engine, the interior were all in there. Albeit quite mouldy, they were in there. So it gave us the sense that this wasn't planned. This wasn't by a professional outfit. But how or why did we go from Leicester to Yeovil? The video did really, really well. As we put that video out, what really happened was the local people started commenting, talking about themselves. The people in Leicestershire saw our video and knew of the gentleman that was involved from the beginning, and we started receiving information about him and his role in this. Then we received information about Yeovil. So then the next 2-3 videos, we're going down to Yeovil. We're activating the police. We're following trails of documents, information, things we've found along the way, and also following up on YouTube comments, following up on messages, emails, ex-business partners of the people involved. So Paul Rutter's ex-business partner alerted me to relationships with Kenyan gold mines and Kenyan gold mine scams. And all of a sudden this big picture came about, but we couldn't link Leicestershire to Yeovil. And so as we made our way through the 9 episodes, we linked up that the car had been taken from Leicester as a repayment of a debt that Paul owed somebody money because they'd invested in gold mines, lost their money, and he'd said to them, take this Lamborghini because this will cover whatever you owe, or is a starting point. This person received the car in good faith, but then when he applied for a logbook, realised, hold up, this car's not what it's supposed to be, and I've got it through ill-gotten gain. That then transpired that the car was moved on to somebody else, sold at a low price, and we followed the trail to a video that the Yeovil and Somerset police found, and this police officer was brilliant. There was a sticker in the rear window of the Diablo, which is a road rat, and the road rat is a police charity. There may not be more than 6 yellow Diablo 6-litre VTs in the UK, but there's only one with this road rat sticker in the rear window. In June 2022, Car Key Solutions in Brentwood published a video on their Facebook page showing proudly that they'd fitted a new ignition barrel and keys to a Diablo 6-litre VT. They had a fake number plate on the car, N666 LAM, which actually is a real number plate, but belongs to a Diablo SV. However, the policeman picked up on the sticker in the rear window, identifying it as the car that he had found in Yeovil and had been stolen. This then gave us 2 things. The car had been at Car Key Solutions in Brentwood. The car was in the Brentwood area and absolutely mint 6 months before it was found stripped in Yeovil. So now we had on our whiteboard in the office, Leicestershire, Essex, Yeovil. But still, we couldn't link how the journey had happened. With the link to Essex, we visited Car Key Solutions, and undercover, we were quite open about the video on the car, and we'd spoken to the managers. He gave us the identification, the invoice of the people that had entrusted him with the vehicle to be rekeyed. This then led us to 3 Asian gentlemen that lived in that area, and we had their ID, we had their address, and the car had moved from Leicestershire in 2020 to a small lock-up garage in a housing estate near Brentwood. At this point, you'd think, why is this car in this location? So we visited the location. The YouTube series was really cranking up the views, the comments, the interest. And with every area that we filmed in, we were receiving so many leads, people's theories, some of them very wrong. There was a gentleman in Yeovil, Sam, who literally, he may have a reputation in that area for being involved in such a thing, but he actually became quite helpful to the whole investigation, even though everybody locally pinned it on him. And we found out very soon after that he had nothing to do with this, and he was quite honest. He was the first thing I would have done was ripped out that engine and sold it. That's where the money was. So we knew he had nothing to do with it. But with all the information come in, it led us to this house, this property, and we found the lock-up garage where the car had been stored. And in the lock-up garage, there was quite a bit of information still in that lock-up garage. Now it transpires, the 3 Asian men, who one of which we met up with, we called, we went for a coffee with. He was very, very open and gave us all the information we needed about everybody that he knew was involved, which linked up some of the characters. He gave us the name of one of his compatriots, and we also learned that the property had changed hands since 2020. So when the Diablo had been placed into the lock-up garage, it was left there and the keys had been lost. When the property changed hands, the 3 Asian gentlemen had taken it on, the Lamborghini Diablo was in the garage still. They needed it removed, so they called Car Key Solutions to have it rekeyed and to move the car on, whether for their benefit, to sell it. However, the unspoken group, which I will not mention, when the car had been moved, kidnapped one of the Asian gentlemen and beat them. And that's where it all turned very, very nasty. with this group involved. It sounds like a Guy Ritchie movie. And if Guy Ritchie's ever interested, please contact me because I have all the information, all the timelines. But when the car was then moved from Car Key Solutions, June 2022, and found stripped in Yeovil, December 2022, we found that there was a Kenyan gentleman that had family in both areas. So the one that ran the car wash was linked to the Kenyan gentleman that had been working on the cars in the lockup before it changed hand to the Asian gentleman. So all of this then came round to the assumption that the Kenyan gold mine scam had something to do with these two Kenyan gentlemen, and all the players involved had been brought together like a lock, stock and barrel, two barrels movie by Guy Ritchie. But the best part of it was the bungling policeman. Although the Avon and Somerset policeman in the south had been absolutely amazing by finding this video, etc., he could not communicate with Essex police. Essex police wouldn't communicate with the Met police and Leicestershire police. This guy had retired and the new guy did what he could. But we had 4 police forces not communicating, and this just highlighted even more the issue with car crime in the UK, and if you cross boundaries, there was very little you could do about it, which I guess the criminals know about. Where are we now? The car was secured. We had the car back at EBC Brakes, who stored the vehicle for us, and Alistair decided to sell the vehicle, and the new owner decided to make it his goal to put it back together. This is around episode 7 or 8 of the full story. Having catalogued all the parts that were missing, it came to approximately £120,000 to put this car back together. Alistair, bless him, had tried rewards, £5,000, £10,000, to no avail. With all our investigations, we came to the conclusion this car had been stripped somewhere between Rayleigh and Dagenham. And somewhere I had a strong feeling that these were parts were on a garage, on shelves, literally waiting to be reunited with the car. They had not been sold. I was adamant that that's it. We'd pinpointed. We had people in the area that had helped us anonymously. We had phone calls from people that told us about the beating that the Asian gentleman had. We had so much good intel that we could not share on the public videos because it would have put people at risk as well as ourselves, but also have given away some of the information we had. Everything we put out in the YouTube videos was real. It was happening as it happened. Effectively, we were down in Yeovil, we filmed it, the next day we put it out, but then there'd be a 2-week period of no video, no update, and it was gripping. It was like a series of a crime drama. And the amount of people, like I know Matt Armstrong himself and some of my fellow YouTuber friends were like really looking forward to the next episode. It was all real and happening. And sometimes we made mistakes, sometimes we knocked on the wrong doors. But ultimately, some of the people that sometimes we thought were the criminals, they were actually just innocent parties that were there to help us. And we were so glad that we didn't put out some of the information that we had gathered because we didn't want to get it so wrong. However, what we did find out, the routes it took us down ultimately led us to where we were. The new owner of the car had 2 options: buy all the parts around the world, which would take him a long period of time, and spend £120,000, or put out one final offer of £40,000 for all the parts to be returned, no questions asked, and get the car finished quicker and return the car to its original condition, the original parts back with the car where they belonged. From Alistair, we knew that the parts had certain marks on the carbon in the engine bay that we knew they belonged to this car, as well as the colour and everything else. So we filmed one last stab attempt to get the attention of the people that had the parts. A £40,000 one-time offer. Respond within 48 hours. We put the video out on Friday evening at 8 p.m. and they had till Monday morning to respond. That Saturday night, I was at my wife and some friends in a pub, and my phone rang with a private number. The most important thing here is my phone wasn't the number we'd given on the video. We'd used a burner phone number, one with no contract. This phone call came from a private number, withheld that number, and as I spoke to him, he told me that he knew where the parts were, and if the £40,000 was real, he would broker it so that we would get the parts back in return for the £40,000. This gentleman turned out to be the same person that had contacted me in August 2020 with evidence of the car in the workshop after it had been taken the first time. And that's how he had my number. So all of a sudden, we're in a situation now where within 24 hours, we've got someone offering us all the parts, but we needed proof because that amount of money, the characters we're dealing with, the whole scenario, and everything's public on YouTube. We needed to bring it together safely, but to ensure that we were getting back the parts for the car. So the new owner of the Diablo took it upon himself with some friends to broker that. And the next thing I knew, I received photos and videos showing the parts in a garage between Dagenham and Rayleigh, on shelves, stored, moved from place to place within that garage for however long, and everything was there except for the wheels. But that was no biggie. So to get everything back was pretty spectacular. So then over the next 2 weeks, going back and forth, and I was out this picture at this point, I knew that there were conversations happening and the exchange occurred. Then the next thing is the car is reunited with the parts. But again, for reasons I don't want to go into, the car changed ownership again. And the next time we saw the car, it was at Supercar Service with Raj, who was putting the car back together. And I was so lucky to be the first person to start that engine once he had tuned it and got it running right, and the ECU had been replaced, and it sounded amazing. So now the car is 85% finished. The new owner is returning it to its once pristine condition, and she's off to paint, and we'll be seeing her again soon on the UK roads, and hopefully the dream to take her back to the factory where she started life once again after this whole extreme story of bungling police. I don't know what to call them. They were just a group of Asian men that didn't seem to know what they had. Car key solutions. We had the two Kenyan gentlemen. We had the gold mine scam, and then the Leicestershire fox hunting gentleman that had the car stored originally. All these characters came into play for the story of the stolen Diablo over the 2.5 years. But for me, the 6-litre VT over that period of time has become one of the most iconic Lamborghinis of all time, and I look forward to hopefully driving her too.
Get a phone call from Slick Willie himself saying he had some bad news. The truck has been stolen. And I still hadn't put two and two together that I had waved at my own truck. So I worked for the railroad as a traveling mechanic for a few years. So traveling mechanics, emphasis on traveling. Our territory covered from Columbia Falls, Montana to Williston, North Dakota to Sheridan, Wyoming. And so we covered everything that isn't a locomotive. So all the on-track equipment, skid steers, loaders, anything like that. And to do so, we were given mechanics trucks to drive. They're about 28,000 pounds loaded CDL class trucks with bread boxes on the back, so that you would have a room essentially where you could make hydraulic hoses or store tools and stuff. They would have generators / welders, and then onboard air compressors ran off the PTO. And so you had a vise, you had essentially an entire work area and all your tools, so you could be mobile and fix stuff wherever it was broken, anytime, day or night. Worked in a small town in Montana called Essex, Montana. We lived in Columbia Falls, about 40 miles. Distance-wise, probably about an hour drive time though, pretty curvy. So for liability purposes, you're not allowed to do any of the mechanicking or maintenance on your own truck. So that all needs to be done in a shop. And so the only shop that was qualified to work on this particular truck, Mercedes engine, Sterling truck, was in Kalispell. And so I had dropped the truck off that morning. This place is a diesel shop, and the owner, they call him Slick Willie, leather jacket, slick back hair, Slick Willie. And I dropped it off and pulled it up to the bay doors. Now the whole compound has a chain link fence around the business. I had pulled the truck up to the shop, up to the bay door, and walked inside. Truck was running, keys inside. Needed service. I had asked Slick Willie if it was okay if I left the keys in the truck. He said, totally fine. It's the next one in. Just roll the window up, shut it off, leave the keys in it, and I will bring it inside before end of shift. So I did, got my stuff out of it, locked all the tools up, but left the keys in the ignition outside the bay door and left. So Columbia Falls to Essex, like I say, 35 miles, 40 miles. On the way to work, the last gas station is in Hungry Horse. It's kind of the morning stop, morning fuel up, morning stop. I'd driven a personal rig that morning and stopped to get a Gatorade and whatever else, and knew the gal there. Her name's Alex. Chatted with her a little bit. It was a cold morning, and we were just talking about weather. And while we were talking, I had noticed a mechanic's truck driving by, assuming it was somebody else, another mechanic. I ran outside and waved, thinking it was a buddy of mine, not realizing that it was my own truck. So made it to Essex. There are 4 mechanics out of Essex, Montana that cover probably 100-mile or more, maybe a 200-mile radius. I walk in the door, and when I get there, get a phone call from Slick Willie himself saying he had some bad news. The truck has been stolen. And I still hadn't put 2 and 2 together that I had waved at my own truck driving by. And of course, we're trying to locate the truck and figure this out. We had cameras, inward-facing cameras and telematics, so you'd think you'd be able to kind of patch through and find where the truck was, but because there were so many channels to go through, it was going to be about a day before we could get a GPS location on it. So kind of put the word out a little bit, had to call and tell my boss that my truck had been stolen. Called the special agent and talked to him. He assured me that I wasn't in any trouble. They had a locked compound, and I was instructed to leave the keys in the truck. So, right, wasn't my deal. But probably within an hour, I get a message through Facebook saying, "Hey, I think is this your truck?" And it is in kind of a known, bad part of town. And there's a photo of a guy trying to get the tools out of this thing. And it is, there's one photo with him with a crowbar trying to open the doors, another one with a sledgehammer trying to break the latches out. Now, the way the lock works, it's a rod that goes through all the doors. So, he wasn't getting in unless he knew to pop that lock off the back. So forwarded that information on to the special agent, and then they called the local police department. And as the story goes, that's when the high speed or low speed pursuit ensued from that place, probably 3 or 4 miles down the highway. And then it turned up some side road that was a dead end. Now there's snow on the ground at this point, so when he turned off the side road, he hit snow and had to turn around. Fast forward a couple weeks, and I had heard the story from everybody involved in this thing. And the girl working at the gas station, Alex, had told me that morning she had left after we chatted. She left work and saw me holding up a bunch of cops. So she pulled up in her car, telling me to get off the road, pointing to get off the road, and then looked through and looked inside, and it wasn't me driving, it was somebody else. She described him as, jerking the wheel back and forth and grinding all the gears. And she said it was only going about 45 miles an hour. And so the high-speed pursuit, she moved off, realizing that they were chasing this guy. So we knew the UPS guy that would deliver up in Essex. Again, fast forward a week, heard the story from him. His name's Hans. So Hans got a hold of me and said that he was delivering a package, and as this truck turned up the road that it went up to get away, make its escape, it about hit him as he was delivering a package, and he knew it was me, so, he gave me the middle finger and didn't think much of it. The cops knew that it was a dead-end road, so they posted up and waited for him to come back down and threw the spike strip out, and he had made it as far as he was going to make it, turned around and was heading back down. And as the story goes, I don't know if it's true or not, but they shot out his front tires. veered off the road, slammed into a tree, in the process hitting a cop car and knocking it off the road. Hit the tree hard enough that it actually opened the doors for the tools. So tools were flying everywhere, and then this guy took off running, and I was told later on that his feet were moving really slow, but his arms were moving really fast, so kind of in slow motion, looked like he was, he's on drugs or something. And then they tased him and brought him down, and then the guy whose car he hit had a bone to pick with him, so he hit him again with the old taser gun, and yeah, so they totaled out the truck. Well, said it was totaled. They ended up repairing it with used parts, and we had to inventory everything. Fast forward again, I talked to Slick Willie, who they were, now it's a legal battle on who's paying what insurance is covering what. And he said that they had caught this guy on camera, and he had moseyed on into the shop, opened all the toolboxes, looked around, looked like he was looking for something, looking through all the tools. Ended up in a bunch of the different trucks inside. They have him on camera. Ended up in a school bus where he took a nap for about 20 minutes before getting into my truck, and then realized the keys were in the ignition, and then tried to start it. Didn't know how to drive it. Didn't know how to drive a clutch or take the air brakes off. So in the video, you see it stall a bunch of times. And then finally, I think he figured out the air brake and then blew through the gate, knocked the gate down, did a bunch of damage on his way out. Got demoted to a truck. So the one I drove before had a bread box on it. The one I was demoted to, the loaner truck, was just a flatback F550. I was working in Shelby, Montana, and at the time there was a bunch of us that were in a little bit of a prank war. I would say a major prank war. There was a prank designed for somebody else. I happened to just fall into the trap at the right time. So I went inside to go get my breakfast for the morning at the gas station, corn dog and an energy drink. And when I came out, the truck had died. Not my truck, it's the loaner. I assumed it's just a pile of junk. Didn't think anything of it. Got in the truck, fastened my seatbelt, put my lunch to the passenger seat, started the truck, and someone, a good friend of mine, decided to pour about 100 small bottles of the finest glitter you can think of down the defrost vents. And when I started it, I was in the middle of a snow globe. Opened the door, jumped out, was caught by my seatbelt, hanging as they pulled up laughing, and inhaled a bunch of glitter. And to this day, that truck drives around, and if it hits a bump just right with the window cracked, glitter it's just, the sun catches it. It's a nice rig, so the glitter shit is what it was.
Will you bring the Lamborghini and just come pick me up around the corner at the Waffle House? So about 4 years ago, I got a call from a few guys in Tennessee who had gathered up some seed capital from some family members, and they wanted to start an exotic car rental company. And I get a lot of calls like this, and I've helped a few companies kind of in a consulting capacity, kind of get their feet under them, help with the first few problems that you have to solve, and just kind of hit the ground running with these types of businesses. They did a good job. I sold them 5 or 6 cars that they could use that were kind of the right cars with some miles or some stories that were the right things to put more miles on and add more stories to. And it did okay, but like most exotic car rental companies, they started to run into some issues, some car crashes, some accidents, some difficult customers and things like that. And so eventually their investors decided, look, I'd kind of like whatever money is still out there to come back. And so they liquidated the cars, but they wanted to stay in the business. And what they told me they wanted to do was to start renting out other people's cars. And anytime you're in the exotic car rental business, I mean, I know every day, literally, I would get a call from an exotic car owner thinking they were doing me the biggest favor in the world by offering to let me rent their cars out as part of my fleet. But there are really 3 problems with this idea. The first is that there's really not enough money to go around. We talked about how the rental rates that you can charge today are so far less on a percentage basis of the value of the car that there's no money to be made in the industry anymore. And Turo's done this, and people who have done this type of thing have just driven the prices down, and it's just a very, very hard way to earn a living. So even if you can convince an owner to take too little for the time and the miles you're going to use your car, there's just not enough money to go around. The second issue is that in the event that a car gets totaled, the renter's insurance is going to pay out what the car is actually worth, not what the guy owes. And generally, the people that ask you to rent their cars out have huge loans against these cars that have faced some depreciation, and they're just trying to keep afloat and make their payments. And so they'd have to write a check to make up their negative equity in the event that the car gets totaled. But both of those issues pale in comparison to the third issue, and that is theft by the renter. Like we learned about with Lucky and the 612 and the Gallardo, when you rent a car and you do something other than just go drive it around, that is considered theft by conversion. And in the scenario where someone else owns the car and you act as an intermediary to rent it to a customer, you don't carry insurance on that car. It would just be too expensive and the policies just don't exist. The owner's policy won't cover it because it's a commercial activity, and the renter's policy won't cover it because that would be like me calling my insurance and saying that I stole my own car. That's not a real thing. So a few weeks ago, this company who was renting out other people's cars had an Audi R8 go missing. And it went from Tennessee, they brought it to Atlanta, and they told me where the tracking device had stopped working, and the car was nowhere to be found. The customer wasn't answering his phone, the credit cards had been canceled, everything was going poorly. And they were going through the steps with the owner of trying to figure out how they're going to recover it, if it can be recovered, offering rewards around and things like that, but the car hadn't turned up. So last week on the 4th of July, I got a bunch of phone calls from the owner of this company at about 12:30, 12:45 in the morning. And I didn't answer the first few, but eventually I saw who it was and I answered. And I said, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, "Ed, we just had somebody rent our Lamborghini Huracan and they're driving as fast as they seem to be able to towards Atlanta, and we're worried that it's about to go away." I said, "Well, that's a valid concern. I think you should call the cops." They're like, "Ed, we're not having any luck with the Audi, with the Atlanta cops. I don't know what we're going to do. Can you please just go try to figure out where they're taking the car?" Because they were probably 20 minutes out of Atlanta at that point. So as I left from the northern suburbs of Atlanta, I sent out a glimpse, a location service through an app to show them live where I was. And they had their updates every 30 seconds to maybe 2 or 3 minutes at a time, just depending on the granularity they were receiving from their tracking device, which I later found out was an OBD dongle that at any moment this guy could look down, see hanging there, and just throw out the window. And we'd have nothing that we could do to find the car. And so as I got down towards about Atlantic Station on 17th Street, I exited, and that's about where they were. And so I was probably 2 minutes behind them, but it was very hard for us to get to exactly the same point because they would just send me an update that we had an all new direction wherever the Lamborghini was going. So it kind of zigzagged around towards West Midtown and then up towards Buckhead, but then went over towards I-75 and was headed almost back north towards Tennessee. But around 285, they remarked as watching the satellite feed, it looked like they were trying to figure out in the Lamborghini if somebody was following them, because they went around some access road and some loops and cloverleafs around the interchange there, but then they went back north on 75. And so I was following them up 75, still a ways back, certainly not in visual range, but I knew we were fairly close. They're trying to direct me as to where to get off, and in fact, they missed the exit that I should have gotten off, and I went an exit further. So they went off on some side streets in the Lamborghini, and they said, all right, he stopped. And it looks like he went into kind of a building. Let me give you the address. And they gave me the address, and it was next door to a body shop that I used to use a lot. I don't know why I remember this body shop's address, but I did send a lot of cars there through the dealership and through the rental company. So I said, all right, I know exactly where that is. I come around in probably 12 minutes or so after they'd pulled into this warehouse, I arrive. And there's lights on the 4th of July at 2:45 in the morning in this warehouse, and it's a wrap company. And it's got there's an Aston Martin Rapide outside and a Mustang and some pretty legitimate looking cars, but it's weird that there's people in there working. So I kind of pull back out on the street and I tell the guys, look, we're not talking about any amount of money that's going to compel me to knock on these guys' doors and interrupt these would-be car thieves right now. I said, now is the time when we know where the car is. You need to call the local police in Marietta and see what they'll do. And so a few minutes later, about 6 police cars very quietly with their lights off pulled down this street that no one else is using at this hour. And I'm parked a few driveways down, just kind of looking at the driveway to see what's happened. And they come up and I sort of explain the circumstance and they say, all right, well, this is not really a criminal matter. I said, I know that, but this is a circumstance where they're just about to lose a very expensive car based on what seems to be happening here. And I said, could you just kind of give me some kind of help in sort of figuring out exactly what's happening to the car right now? They're like, no, I mean, it's really not our thing. Obviously it's not illegal for somebody to drive a car from Tennessee to Georgia. we understand it's against some rental agreement or whatever the case may be, but that's a civil matter. That's not for us right now. Eventually, it can become a theft by conversion circumstance, but that's not really where we're at this moment. So we don't really have any jurisdiction or probable cause to do anything. And I'm like, yeah, but it's kind of weird that a Lamborghini just pulled in here and there's lights on in this shop in the middle of the night to work on a car that's not allowed to be worked on. I mean, I know it's not exactly a criminal circumstance, but can we at least just go see what's going on? So they kind of talked amongst themselves for a little while. And in the meantime, I'm getting calls from the owner of the rental company, the owner of the car, their lawyer, everyone saying, Ed, you just have to figure out some way. We can't lose this car. And I told him, I said, look, I get it. I know this is the worst nightmare you could ever imagine. And I'm not here to say I told you so, but this is a very difficult thing to proceed through because I don't even work for you. I don't have any legal grounds to repossess this car. And if they try to make things sticky, we're not going to have a whole lot of outs here. So I keep talking to the cops and they say, all right, let's just kind of drive around there. So we do, and their lights off, very quiet, and they kind of surround the building. So I get out, and one of the cops gets out, and we walk in there together. And as we walk in, it's like business as usual in this wrap shop. They've got a bunch of nice cars, a new R8 and an NSX and a bunch of stuff they're in progress working on. And there's 5 or 6 employees there at 3 in the morning on the holiday, just working like it's 2 in the afternoon on a weekday. In the middle of the shop, there is a red Lamborghini Huracan, and there's this guy pulling wires out of it. He's got the dash out of the car, the whole front trunk liner's out. He's got all these tools out, and there's things laying out. I'm like, goodness gracious. And so I walk over there, and I'm like, what's going on here? And he said, this guy just sold the car, and he's looking for us to take the camera system out so he can put it in his next car. I said, well, this is actually a car he rented a few hours ago, and there's no authorization to do any work, and there's not a camera system in the car. He's definitely not allowed to do that, and we'd like you not to give him the car back. And he's like, look, I see all these cops. I'm not here to do anything wrong. If that's what the circumstance is, by all means. I'm not here to put up a fight, but I need to talk to this guy and just see what's going on. So he does a FaceTime call with the person who had dropped the car off, who was different than the female with a California driver's license who had rented the car just a few hours earlier in Tennessee. And he's like, oh yeah, man, we just went out to get some dinner at Waffle House and we'll be right there. And I certainly couldn't fault Waffle House as being the best choice of Atlanta cuisine at 3 in the morning on a holiday. But he said he was going to be back. He was calling an Uber or something like that. But he said, well, you just told me that you sold this car and you wanted me to remove that. And this guy's saying it's a rental car. He said, well, yeah. So I kind of took the phone from him. I said, hey, I'm with the rental company. We're going to be taking the car back right now. You're welcome to come back and we can discuss it. We've got the police here. Everything will be on the up and up, but we're not going to be taking things out of the car anymore, just so we're all clear. He's like, yeah, I'm on the way. Hangs up the phone. So I'm like, if you don't mind, I don't know what he was going to pay you for this job. I'll make sure that you're made whole beyond that, but just go ahead and let's try to put this thing back together, and then I'm going to end up taking it out of here. I'm going to park it in my warehouse, and then they can come pick it up in the next few days. So he gets it buttoned up, and the car starts, and this guy calls again. And I pick up his phone because he's been working, and he had no problem with that. And I'm like, look, I'm about to take this car back. Let's not worry about this anymore. You can take anything up that you have outstanding with the rental company. They'll be awaiting your call. And he's like, wait. My Uber just got canceled because my card got declined. Will you bring the Lamborghini and just come pick me up around the corner at the Waffle House? I said, yeah, you just order me around to Hash Browns and I'll be right around the corner. So obviously I did not go around the corner and pick this guy up at the local Waffle House. I'll just leave that to him and the owner of the rental company to sort out. But I was able to get the car home safe and sound to the VINwiki warehouse, and a couple days later they sent their guys down to pick it up. But I think we were really probably 15 or 20 minutes away from that car disappearing and never being seen again. And as you think about these types of businesses, all these interesting things that you can do with cars, a lot of times the risks just really do outweigh the potential reward that the industry has to offer. But fortunately in this circumstance, VINwiki was able to come to the rescue and save another stolen Lamborghini. But next time, I can't imagine we get that lucky.
And I throw something in a dumpster and I look over to the left and I'm like, something's missing. I have an E36 M3 BMW that I've been racing for about 3 years at that point. I love this car, I love this platform, and I didn't really realize why so many people drive the E36 M3. If you get it on the track, it's not also powerful, 250 horsepower, but I dominate on the track. I can catch Corvettes, Mustangs left and right because the car is really dialed in right. Anyway, I have kind of a habit of buying cars that I really don't need. And this one particular time I purchased a new Mercedes and I was running out of garage space. So I decided to take the M3 out of the garage and put it into my race trailer. Nothing else was sitting in there. I wasn't a big fan of doing that, but I put it in the race trailer and then put the trailer behind my office, which is where it stayed for 10 years before that. One day I go to my office about 10 days later and I throw something in a dumpster and I look over to the left and I'm like, something's missing. I know my trailer's not gone. Oh my God. So I run inside, get on the video camera, scroll through it for the past 12 hours, and oh my God, at 4 in the morning, someone stole my trailer with my BMW race car inside of it. Only one person knew the car was in there, and there's no way in the world. So I call the police come out, they take a record, I get on Craigslist, I get on all the websites, try to track down my trailer as much as possible. I put it on Facebook, it shared over 3,000 times. I was getting notified on all the forums that I was getting connected to. It was even to the point where we made a YouTube page about it. The funny thing is I got contacted by Mythbusters out in California and they said they found a trailer, but this was not my trailer. Ironically, in my week that my trailer was stolen, there was another trailer in Texas that was also stolen with another race car in it. That race car was stolen and the trailer was retrieved in California. So these things get around. So 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, I don't hear anything. I'm getting discouraged because unfortunately on race cars, you don't put insurance on them because if you crash them, chances are you're just gonna start over. So I would take the parts off. So the parts off and put them on a new car if it ever wrecked into a wall. So unfortunately, the car wasn't insured. Now, I thought the trailer was insured, but I later find out that the trailer is only insured when it's connected to my truck. So unfortunately, the trailer wasn't insured. So altogether, I have a $25,000 asset that's now gone. I was very depressed for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And literally 2 months later, I get a phone call from a guy, I'm not out of the country, but out of the state, and someone said, hey, are you missing a red BMW race car? I said, actually I am. He said, well, I just purchased it. I said, excuse me? He's like, yes, I just purchased it. I said, stop, what's your address? So he gives me an address. Meanwhile, on the second call, while I'm talking to him, I'm calling the police, telling them, hey, my asset's been found, the trailer and the car, go over there and go get it right now. Meanwhile, I'm talking to him and I find out he's actually a pretty nice guy. He just found this trailer online and it was for sale for $1,200. He came, the guy said, don't worry about it, I'll bring it to you. So he brought it to him and he's like, something's really strange. Then he opens up the trailer and there's a BMW race car in it. He's like, okay, something's really up. But this guy, again, dropped it off with a U-Haul trailer and drove away and no one's ever seen him since. So he opened up the trailer. My name is still on the side of the car. He didn't even take the time to take my name off the side. So the guy Googled, found me, called my cell phone, and that's how I was able to find my BMW. So I told the guy, hey, how much did you pay for it? He said, since the guy didn't provide him a title for the trailer, he only paid him $800. I said, sir, I'll pay you $1,000 right now for your lost time, whatever it's worth. I just need my assets back. So he ended up letting the police take it in, and not only did the police really give it to me because I had to now pay to retrieve my trailer out of the tow yard, but they did it times 2 because they said I had to pay to get my car back and they had to pay to get my trailer back. Now, all said and done, they stole my steering wheel for some reason. They didn't steal the Sparco seats. They didn't steal the Brembo brakes, but they stole my wheels and my steering wheel. So all in all, I had probably a couple of $1,000s worth of damage done to it. And they also crashed my trailer when they were pulling it out from behind my office. But again, still, that was a minor fix. But overall, I was the luckiest person by far to get both those assets back within 2 months unscathed.
And I said, ma'am, every part of what you just said is wrong and impossible. In 2006, when I was in college at Georgia Tech, I started an exotic car rental company. This was when you could get stated income loans for exotic cars, so I could say what I thought I was going to make in renting it out. And I got a loan for a Lamborghini at 20 years old. It was a 2004 Giallo Midas, pearl yellow Lamborghini Gallardo. Over the next few months, and I'd add more cars and get more loans, and I had a couple Ferraris and things like that. But in 2009, a few years into the life of this business, I was going to get married. I'd actually started dating my wife a week after I incorporated the rental car company, so she was well aware of the cars and the drama that tended to come with them. And at this time, it was still an extremely small company. I was the only real employee. I would sometimes get help from mechanically minded friends or people who would give me rides after I drop a car off. This was before the days of Uber and things like that, and you certainly weren't going to use an Atlanta-based taxi cab. And so I was really just hustling in every way that I possibly could to get the cars out as many days as I could to get them rented. And so I had a few really good customers that would come back periodically. And the best kinds of rental car customers are the ones that pretend they own the cars because they take really good care of them. And so I would call that like ownership replacement. And keep in mind, this is 08, 09. This is when the US economy is falling apart. Depreciation in luxury assets is rampant. So my inventory is going down in value, but the demand for rentals as an alternative to owning the cars and paying the maintenance and the insurance and the depreciation and everything yourself was a really, really attractive thing. I had a customer who was previously an Atlanta police officer. He was retired or on disability or something like that, but he'd rented my cars several times and he'd been great to them. Maybe they'd come back smelling a little bad from things he'd done in them, but at the end of the day, it was all right. And so he was a good customer and he paid well. He was going to rent the Gallardo around the time that I was going to be getting married. And of course, I didn't have anybody to take care of the business while I'm gone on my honeymoon. And so I said, look, the cars have to be back in by Wednesday before I get married on Saturday, because I had my bachelor party and things like that to happen in those days going up. And I just really didn't want the hassle. And the last thing I wanted was to not know where the cars were while I'm getting married. A foreshadowing phrase there. Well, he was actually going to have a friend in town. So in addition to renting my Gallardo, he rented my Ferrari 612 Scaglietti. And they're driving him around. I think he probably picked him up on a Friday, the Friday before the rehearsal. And so he's driving around, and they actually end up extending the rental. They come back and they pay me in cash. Previously, I'd verified his insurance and he'd paid on a credit card. The way most of the rentals would happen, there's contracts in place. Everything's the way it's supposed to be. Now, the problem with the exotic car rental business is generally the insurance, because you've got to have the right commercial insurance in place, but you can't use it because if you ever file a claim, you can't renew it. That creates a very difficult situation that you're not that protected against things like theft. And I've told a whole lot of stories from this very chair about what happens to exotic car rental companies when people don't bring the cars back. That's the one thing that you really cannot have protection from. And we've helped people to recover these stolen cars and things like that, because when somebody doesn't return something that they have rented and it's a car, it's not a normal Grand Theft Auto situation. It is theft by conversion. I was telling him as he was renting these cars that they had to be back on Wednesday. And that's all going well until Tuesday, and he stops answering the phone. And now I've got multiple tracking systems on these cars. They've got internal batteries, they're hidden, things like that. I know where the cars are, and so I go to find where is the Gallardo. Tuesday night, I go to its location. It's in a body shop in Midtown Atlanta, and the whole nose is off the car. He had dropped it off thinking they were going to somehow fix a totally destroyed front bumper in time for him to get it back to me the next day. Well, he's not answering his phone, but I bring my tow truck driver down there. I tell him take it to the body shop that I use. It was not the first time or the fourth that car was going to be repainted on its front, so not that big of a deal. But for some reason, at that point, the 612's transponder was not reporting. And I saw where it was last, and of course I'm calling him about every 30 minutes trying to find out where it is. I get nothing. The next day, we're looking all over. And at the time, now prominent automotive YouTuber Doug DeMuro was not an automotive YouTuber. He was working for Porsche here in Atlanta at their headquarters. And he had a website that he ran in his spare time called Chasing Exotics. And it was a car spotting website where people would go around and they would take pictures of the cool cars that they saw. And because he was from Atlanta, I've known Doug since college, there were a lot of Atlanta-based spotters. So I saw some pictures of the car. It was popping up at different places, and The problem was I had already called the cops and said, hey, I kind of need y'all to be on the lookout for this car. And they had explained to me that, well, he's allowed to have it. You've extended his rental. It's not stolen. And I'm like, well, how do I make it stolen? Like, at what point? He's like, well, you've got to notify him by mail and do all these things. And so I literally spoke to cops on Wednesday, and they said, oh yeah, the car's right in front of us here at the valet at Lenox Mall. But I'm 30 minutes away with the spare key, and they're like, well, they're coming to pick it up. It's driving away. And I'm like, stop them. They are not even the person that's on the rental contract. And so at that point, I knew this because it was a female in the car. I'm talking to my lawyers. I'm talking to everybody. I'm talking to friends that are out riding around. And, of course, this is Wednesday, getting into Thursday. Thursday night, I'm actually out at my bachelor party. And this is a pretty mild bachelor party. This is go race, go karts, have a nice dinner. I get a phone call. And I step away from the table because I'm ready to answer any phone call that there is. And I get a call and it says, it's a woman. And she says, my husband is the guy who bought your Ferrari yesterday from your employee, but we've decided that we really don't want it. So we want the BMW and the cash that we gave him for this car back. And I said, ma'am, every part of what you just said is wrong and impossible. So I need to understand what you think happened, and then I'll hopefully be able to fill in some of the gaps. And ultimately, you need to know that the car you have is stolen and I need to have it back. And she said, well, I'm a lawyer and possession is 9/10 of the law. And I said, well, that's not the way the law works. It's a rental car, so possession is literally 0/10 of the law. And, there's a lot of ways this can go, but ultimately I need you to get back. And she said, well, we need our stuff back. And so she had given a 2007 or 8 BMW 750 IL and $15,000 in cash. Or I should say, her husband had given it to my customer who was representing himself as someone in a position to sell this car. So I said, all right, well, this is massively problematic. I do not have an employee, much less that person as an employee. And so just this is how it's all going to go. And so they're out. They've hidden the car. They had disconnected the battery, effectively that it had been disconnected for long enough that the internal capacitance of the transponder had died. So it was in their garage. I knew generally where it was, but I couldn't break into their gated community and then into their garage to get my car back with my spare key. And periodically they would reconnect the battery and move the car. The next day, I finally get in touch with my customer, and he explains that he kind of thought I was going to be happy that he had sold the car because he had gotten them to agree to a very high selling price, even though he was going to self-finance it somehow. And I said, well, who is it? And he said, well, I don't have his, driver's license or his address or any of that information, but his name is Lucky. And so we're at a Waffle House where you have such meetings with people who have been dodging your phone calls for several days on the day after your bachelor party before you've got to race to the total other side of town to have your rehearsal. And I said, well, we have to get this car back. So he's talking and he's like, well, I've got the BMW, but I gave you the $15,000 for the rentals to extend them. I thought that's how this was all going to work. I was like, well, are you going to give him the BMW? And he's like, well, am I going to go to jail? And I'm like, we have to get the car back. But they would no longer agree to meet because they're worried about prosecution and things like that. And so literally it's back and forth. I'm going all over town, driving as fast as I can to get through all the different appointments and things like that. And they have stopped responding. We don't know where the car is. We're getting nowhere. The next day is my wedding day. And I had to tell my fiance that if my phone rings during the ceremony, I have to answer it. Because if we lose this car, not only do we go out of business because we have to file the insurance claim that'll never get paid, then we can't afford to pay the other ones, which are upside down because everything's upside down on the loans. I was like, this is irrecoverable. But we should still absolutely get married and enjoy a great life together. No, don't hear me as not saying that. But I mean, it's a bad day. Ultimately, we don't find it throughout the whole day Saturday. I remember almost nothing of my wedding because it was just such a blur of of anxiety and concern and stress and everything. I would like to think that the customer that owed me these cars back was going to go out and get it, but he, of course, did not do anything. Ultimately, I have to leave on my honeymoon. And I don't know where the car is. I know where the Gallardo is. I know it'll be fixed eventually. I actually end up getting this guy's insurance to pay for the repairs to that. But in the meantime, I have to tell my lawyer, please do what you can to find this car because I'd really like to have it back. And it's going to be the worst thing in my life if I don't. Gone for a week to an island in the Caribbean where you can't check email or phones or anything like that. Just have to not know. and try to enjoy myself, and I managed to. But I got back and I finally got in touch with Lucky. And it took several days, but I just said, hey man, you've got a car that you know is stolen. You can't title it, register it, sell it, do anything, or you shouldn't be able to, despite what's happened in the last couple of weeks in our lives. And so I'm gonna need it back. Even though I had been paid a good bit of money for the rentals, I had massive expenses related to everything. And so he said, I need $5,000 to give you the car back. And I said, well, just so we're all on the same page, that is extortion for the return of stolen property that you know is stolen, that you know is mine, that you didn't acquire properly. So, man, I need my $5,000. Now, at the time, since I'd been paid in cash, I actually didn't have $5,000 in my checking account because it was that kind of business where there were a lot of months where you end with $10. And it's like, that's a win because it's not negative. And so I was talking to the cops and I said, hey, I got in touch with Lucky. He said he'll give me the car back for $5,000. And they're like, well, see if he'll take a check. And I said, are you saying that I should bounce that check? Because I feel compelled to remind you, Mr. Law Enforcement Officer, that it's a felony to bounce a check for $5,000. He said, yeah, don't worry about it. We're not going to come after you for it. So, great. Lucky was happy to take a check. He tells me the parking lot where they've now left the car. And of course, not only is the battery dead, but it's disconnected and everything. So I meet him down there, call a tow truck driver, give him his check, sign it Mickey Mouse. And he actually says, you know what? You seem to know a lot about cars. Could you tell me something about my Maserati? And he brings out the ugliest looking Quattroporte painted like seafoam green so poorly by some back alley body shop that the paint is falling off in chunks. And he's like, what do I do? I said, well, I've got a great body shop. And we talked for long enough that he doesn't run off with this check that he's going to try to deposit and get mad about. We get the car towed back to my warehouse where I happened to live at the time. I was going to move in with my new wife the next week. We weren't supposed to live in this warehouse, but I'd converted a utility sink into a shower and another room, an office into a bedroom. It was the best living ever. But no, living with my new wife was the best living ever. But warehouse living is awesome if you ever get the chance. Of course, it takes all of another hour for Lucky to come up banging on the door being like, that wasn't a good check. I said, I know it wasn't a good check. It was for stolen property. It doesn't have to be good. We're going to make this the last time we see each other, and that's going to be all. He accepted that, and he threatened to kill me, but never did, as you can see. And I finally got the car back. It was really no worse for wear. He'd scuffed the clear bra just a little bit. We replaced that panel. The car remained part of the rental fleet for a couple more years, and then eventually I went to work at Lamborghini Atlanta and sold them off. I found out that it was just easier to make money selling people cars than renting them by the day. But that's why my wedding day was the worst day of my life.
Literally made a Molotov cocktail out of this water bottle full of gasoline. Full disclaimer, I'm not the best storyteller in the world, but this is kind of a story of something really crazy that happened, I think it was about 2.5 years ago, that because of kind of like legal reasons and scaredness of getting in trouble with the people that did what I'm about to talk about, has kind of stayed on the back burner. I'm into drifting a lot, and 2 or 3 years ago, I didn't used to get to go to the track that often. And we would get a group of people together and we would go take our drift cars, like 240SXs and Mustangs and whatever we had. And we'd go street drifting, which was primarily behind warehouse buildings, parking lots, and usually industrial areas, not necessarily on the street, but industrial areas where we could go have fun and do it in a safe manner and learn more skills, whatever you want to say. We're just doing burnouts in cars moving. So one of these days we're going to a street spot, maybe 11 p.m. And I remember we're rolling up maybe a group of 7 or 8 different cars, and we see what looks like a Zamboni in the parking lot. Like, kind of look like a Zamboni, maybe a little bit like a street sweeper, just a really tall looking thing with headlights pointing right at us. And usually if you're going up to a warehouse parking lot to, go drift, you don't go there if there's parking lights or if it looks like there's another car there. So we go up, and as we get closer, it turns out that it's a rolled over Ford Expedition, like a brand new Ford Expedition, like the cool turbo one, like a really nice car on its side. So we're all kind of like, what? Everybody's pulling out their cell phones and, taking Instagram clips and little videos of this car that's rolled over on its side. And we start looking at it a little bit more, and there's a little itty bitty fire in the back seat. I didn't think the car was stolen at this point, but everyone else who's more intelligent than me was like, oh, okay, someone stole the car, went for a joyride, rolled it over. I'm thinking to myself, like, what happened? Like, why is this car like that? So I was confused, but they instantly, we grabbed our fire extinguisher because we have fire extinguishers in our drift cars, and put the little itty bitty fire out, called the police. And, it was weird and scary. And we were like, oh, this is gonna be crazy to show this rolled car. Like maybe some kids are messing around with it. And we started, or at least I started realizing the severity of the situation then, that, okay, this car's a main plate on it. It was probably stolen and someone probably tried to start it on fire. So we're at a crime scene right now, and we just called the police, and it's pretty sketchy because we don't know where the people are. Still wasn't really thinking that much of it, but in between the time of when we called the police and when the police showed up, car rolls into the parking lot, maybe a 1990s Civic, 4 dudes in it, all pretty young. Rolls up, no headlights on, which would normally be sketchy, but when you're going drifting, usually we roll up without headlights on anyway. So we thought maybe they came to see the car rolled over, and they start getting closer and a little sketchy, and they start talking to some of us. And I remember the words they said was, "Yo, you call 12?" And one of my friends goes, "Yeah, we called the cops." And the dude goes, "Oh, that's my boy." And we're still like, was it his friend's car? We didn't still really understand the situation, what was happening. So this dude comes up, looks pretty sketchy, and he's got some marijuana leaf boxers on. He's got a nice little ponytail, and he's got he looked like he had like a water bottle full of beer or something. We're like still not really thinking that much. Okay, this dude's upset that we call the cops, whatever. So we kind of get back to our cars just to kind of get some distance from them. And that water bottle full of what we thought was beer was actually gasoline. And the dude had lit on fire like a towel or something, and literally made a Molotov cocktail out of this water bottle full of gasoline and blew up the expedition in front of us. So we're literally, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 feet away from this car, and we just see it go poof up in flames. We don't even realize what's happening. Like I was with a girl at the time who was like a little bit freaked out. Some of our other friends were like, "Oh my God, they just blew up the car." So in this situation, we had a car full of some of my friends that went after the people that blew up the car and got into a full-on road chase. And apparently one of the girls in that car started freaking out, so they ended up giving up. But the cops had showed up right after that. They had left and set the car on fire. So we've got cops rolling up. We've got like 8 cars that we wind up scattering like a Fast and Furious movie. I filmed all of this. I have a vlog of this entire day, but I was scared to upload it because of legal stuff. So it's now 2.5 years later, and it's the first time I've said anything of it. But I remember ripping by this car on fire because we were kind of like trapped on one side of the parking lot, and the gas tank exploding right in front of us, and just going by this car torched up in flames, and the situation, and realizing that, maybe they wouldn't have ever heard us, but we obviously called the cops on their friend that stole a car and blew it up. If they were cool enough with blowing up a car in front of us, like what else? It was definitely a very scary situation, but I'd never seen a car blow up, so it was a little fascinating. And the story doesn't really have a great ending because the cops basically come and say, "Oh yeah, this kind of thing happens all the time." They usually don't get caught. It's just kind of a thing, like unless we can get a plate for them for something. Like their car was probably stolen too, like they'll probably get away with it. It's harmless. And we're all shaken up. We've never seen anything like this, and here the police are telling us that this is just a normal occurrence on a Friday night. So that's kind of where it ended. We haven't heard anything since regarding those people, but it did get around back to us because we had to file out police reports on the situation when the cops came and talking about it. And I guess one of my friends who had been in some YouTube videos street drifting, they made the connection once they had his stuff on file, and then we wound up all getting phone calls about not going to Orlando anymore for street drifting. So after that situation, I haven't really gone out street drifting anymore because of A, being shaken up a little bit by that, and B, the fact that the sheriff of Orlando doesn't like us. We were there while the fire department was, hosing it off or whatever they're doing with that. And, we kind of stayed and watched, and we talked to the cops and filled out police reports and everything, but they were just very much so like, this is like, they just brushed it off. And it definitely was a little bit eye-opening to think that wasn't even really a big deal to them. But I guess there's people being shot and stuff. But that's when we did find out that car was reported stolen. And it was, I guess, a family from Maine that was in Florida on vacation. I think it had been stolen from like one of the amusement parks or something. And I don't know. I mean, I guess they took it back there to go do donuts or mess around with. But watching like a bunch of criminals blow up a car in front of you it's pretty like
Over the years, we've shared well over 1,000 stories here on the channel, but the one that had the greatest impact on VINwiki as a company was the story of us recovering 2 stolen Lamborghinis that had been missing for over 6 years at the time. It helped us to really showcase exactly what we wanted the VINwiki app to be about, and it helped us to cement some amazing relationships with sponsors like Premier Financial Services. But at the time, there were some legal details that I simply couldn't reveal, and since then there have been some updates with the cars, some updates with the case, and so I thought today I would retell the story with all the details that I couldn't reveal the first time. We launched the VINwiki app in 2016, and we describe it as a crowdsourcing vehicle history reporting platform, meaning anyone can post information to any car by its VIN or by its license plate, and that becomes a very social timeline of that car's history. So around that time, I'm doing a lot of car shows and events and presentations, just trying to evangelize the concept that if you tell your car's story, it can add value down the road. And a couple of months after that, I guess in August of 2016, one Sunday evening, I was driving home, and out of the corner of my eye, in the parking lot of a Target near my house, I saw an Arancio Borealis, a pearl orange 2008 Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera. Now, for the 5 years prior, I had been the director of sales at Lamborghini Atlanta, and I knew that at any moment there were between 100 and 150 Lamborghinis registered in the state of Georgia, and at that time I had sold most of them, and if not, I'd seen them in service, and I did not know of any orange '08 Superleggeras that were registered in Georgia. And so I was fascinated to go down there and post the car to our new app. And so I pull in, it's kind of a drizzly day, and I notice that the car has a dealer tag on it. Now with dealer tags or manufacturer tags or transporter tags, those aren't tied to the VIN. So when somebody makes a post through our plate to VIN system, we actually pull the VIN from the license plate out of the state systems, and then all the posts are referenced by the VIN, since that doesn't change. The license plates will come and go with different ownership transitions. And so since it was on a dealer tag, I couldn't just pull it up through our system. I had to get out and actually take a picture of the VIN in order to post it. So I snap a few pictures around the car, and it's a high option Superleggera with carbon ceramic brakes and the high rear wing and backup camera and stuff like that. But it's not in the nicest of shape. It's got cheap tires on it, some scratches and things, and it's clearly been driven. There's also a child seat in it, which I thought was fascinating. I had about a 2-year-old son at the time, and so the idea of somebody driving around in their Lamborghini with their kid was something I was becoming more and more fascinated with. And so obviously I can't post it right then. I just snapped some pictures, but you know, it's very peculiar. There's a new car in town. I'm excited about that. So I go home and start looking at the pictures, and immediately something stands out. The VIN that's on the windshield of the car is actually in the wrong font. Now, of course, who else is going to notice this? But I'd sold a ton of Lamborghinis at that point, and I knew that the font they used for at least the North American cars looked different than what I saw. And when I typed it into the VINwiki app, it wouldn't let me post. And that's because it would not validate. Now, post-1981 US VINs use what's called a checksum in order to make sure that immediately it is a valid VIN. It keeps people at service shops and things from mistyping a character and then it not referencing the right car. And so you run a calculation against a check digit that's part of the VIN, and that will tell you immediately if it's a valid VIN. And this wasn't. But it wasn't exactly because one of the digits was off. It was because one of the digits was missing. So as I counted them, there were only 16 digits rather than the 17 that there should have been. And that was strange, but at the time we weren't as familiar with VIN swapping and how prevalent that's obviously become since then with stolen cars and things like that. So the next day, I call a friend at the Sandy Springs Police Department and I said, hey, I know this isn't your jurisdiction, your area, but I came across this car and I don't really know what to make of it. And he said, well, based on what you've described, it sounds like it's probably a stolen car and somebody's put the wrong VIN on it. He said, let me dig into it a little bit with our auto theft division, and if something turns up, I'll give you a call back. But I don't hear from him, but in a couple of days later, I do get a call from somebody with the Department of Revenue rather than the auto theft unit. And they said they were looking for an orange Gallardo in the Atlanta area. They'd heard it had kind of been around a few places. And actually, when I had posted to the wrong VIN in the VINwiki app, we can do that as saying it's like a non-US VIN to get around our validation. Other people had spotted that car, actually once on a truck outside of Atlanta Tech Village, where I was almost every week at that point for different meetings and things like that, once around Buckhead and stuff like that. So people had seen this car and they'd actually gotten close enough, and obviously, to write down the shown VIN and post to it in that way through the app. And so they knew that the car was in the area, but they didn't know much more than that. And so I told him that I thought that the car was probably VIN 6668. And he was kind of confused because he's like, that's what we think it is as well, but how would you possibly know that? And I explained that in the 2 days prior, I'd been talking to my developers and the people who were helping us to build up the VINwiki app, and we had found a list of all of the US Superleggeras from 2008 in the app. So one of the features that people like to use is building lists of cars in the VINwiki app. It can be all the cars that you've ever owned. It can be all of a certain type of car. In this case, it was. And Lamborghini only imported about 100 2008 Superleggeras, and they were only in 5 colors: orange, yellow, black, gray, and white. And if I eliminated the other colors and the cars that were significantly modified and the cars that didn't have carbon ceramic brakes, fairly quickly, we narrowed it down to about 20 cars that this one could have been. And so I went through and pulled all the Carfaxes, and literally only one had ever been reported stolen, and that was VIN 6668. So the car had the ZHWGU US prefix for a Lamborghini Gallardo, and then it was a Superleggera, but then the last build sequence was actually, I think, like almost 8,000, which would have been well beyond the sequencing for a Superleggera. So in addition to the fact that the VIN was not in the right font, didn't have the right number of characters, I knew that it had been sort of fabricated by someone who didn't know the right range of VINs to put on a Superleggera. So they said, yes, we do think it's that car, but we haven't had a whole lot of luck in tracking it down any further. But we really appreciate the pictures that you sent us, and if anything pops up, we will be happy to share more. Now, my interest in the car was honestly, I thought, who in the world is going to be the buyer whenever this goes back to an insurance company or a lien holder or whoever owns this car legally right now? It's got to be cheap, and I always want to buy a cheap Gallardo, and so I was really hopeful that we'd be able to get this thing back and either buy it through the police auction or somehow buy this cheap orange Superleggera, because they are phenomenal cars. And at the time, I just had the green LP640, which was such low miles, such a nice car. I was honestly starting to feel guilty about it, and I couldn't get tires for it. Pirelli only manufactures them every few years. There weren't any available for the right cars that wouldn't harm the diff and the clutch, and so I wanted another car to drive. And so this seemed like the perfect candidate. Needed a little bit of reconditioning, needed the VINs put back onto it that would be right, but we seemed to have a case for that. So I was hoping that we'd be able to find it, but they really didn't have anything. However, I did have, obviously, the picture of the dealer tag that was on the car. And so I thought, since that was in Gwinnett County, I could go to the Gwinnett County tag office and ask the representatives there who owns this dealer tag, because obviously they would believe that this car is for sale. I want to buy this car. I'll go talk to them and maybe they'll tell me. So I go in and I wait my turn, and the lady that picks my number is not having a great day. And she immediately tells me that she's not allowed to share that kind of information with me. But through some sweet talking and some, say, shrewd negotiation, she eventually agrees to just tell me the name of the dealership. And I thank her profusely. I go home, and obviously then I can Google it, look through the state records, and I can find an address. And in fact, there was also a phone number. Of course, nobody answers this phone number, and so I decide, well, the only thing left to do is drive over and see it. Now, it was not like a normal car dealership lot. It was part of a strip of warehouse units that was not facing the street, was not really the kind of place that you'd normally want to have a car dealership. And so I knock on the door, and this kid comes and answers and says, how can I help you? And I said, do you guys have an orange Gallardo Superleggera here for sale? He says, well, we do, but the owner of the dealership's not here, so I can show you the car, but I can't do anything beyond that. You'll just have to talk to him if you want to buy it. I said, man, that would be amazing. So he walks us back through a couple of hallways, and we wind up in this, fairly small warehouse. It has room for 4, 5, 6 cars, and in fact, there is the 2008 orange Superleggera, and there's also another Gallardo Spider right next to it in kind of a silvery blue. I think it's a Zero Thetis. And so it had the exact same wrong font. It put in exactly the same way under the windshield. And so somebody had gone through a lot of trouble in trying to swap the VINs on these cars, but what can you really do with a stolen car? Over the years, I've been offered several stolen exotic cars in very interesting circumstances, but they're always very, very inexpensive because there's, again, not that much you can do with them. You can't legally register them, and if you drive them around too much, you're bound to get into some trouble. And so I actually opened the door, and the door jamb plaque had also been remanufactured and fabricated in order to show this wrong VIN. It was also only 16 digits, and so just a very, very strange thing. So I'm looking around the car, and since the windshield and the door jambs are showing the wrong VIN, without getting the car up in the air, I'm not going to see the frame rail. I'm not going to have a really, really easy way to find the actual VIN for this car. But he lets us start it up, get in it. I take some more pictures, and it's showing almost 40,000 miles. And so it's been driven a lot. And as I recall, having looked at the Carfax, I think it was stolen with very, very few miles when it was fairly new, in fact. And so You know, nobody had taken this car to an authorized service center because they might have reported the VIN at that point and that would have been flagged as incorrect. And so I don't know who had been taking care of this car, but it hadn't been driven terribly affectionately, some curved wheels and stuff like that. But as I opened the glove box, there's the owner's manual. And I knew that when a new Lamborghini got delivered, the owner's manual had boxes, blanks, where we had to hand write in the VIN. And as I open it up on the first page, there it is, the VIN for 6668. And so I took a picture of that, took some more pictures of the cars, left the guy my contact information. I said, hey, if you don't mind, when he gets back in, tell him I'm interested in buying the car and I'll be happy to come back and we could take it for a drive. And so obviously I never hear from the guy, but I go back home and I send all that information to the people at the Department of Revenue and the cops and everything, and they are like, wow, it's all just kind of served up to us on a silver platter. And so I'm excited. Maybe one day soon I'm going to get the chance to bid at a police auction and maybe buy this car. But obviously the possibility remained that it might go back to the lien holder. And I had noticed that both of the cars had been stolen out of the state of California. And even though Carfax didn't show this big stolen brand on the summary page, it did show an entry that said each car had been stolen. And when I had talked to the Department of Revenue officer, he said it wasn't exactly that this was like a grand theft auto situation. It seemed like the guy just owed too much money on the cars and probably said they were stolen in order to get his insurance to buy the things out. And it's also possible that the insurance companies had never really paid. So I called a friend that was a California dealer and I said, hey, can you look in your system and see who the lien holders are or who's titled to these two cars? And he said that one of them was to a dealership. It was to O'Gara. That was the Spider. And the Superleggera was to All Points Capital. Now, I had already contacted the usual suspects of exotic car lenders that were really, really active in 2008. People like Premier Financial Services that were kind of the go-to outlets for exotic car financing. And none of them recognized the VIN. None of them were missing either of the cars. However, All Points was kind of like a secondary lender, and they would buy groups of loans from these smaller leasing companies that would then kind of replenish their cash and make new deals. And so I knew a few of them that used All Points. I'd actually had a lease through a different company that used All Points back when I had the exotic car rental company. And so it wasn't through that company, but I called another one, Manhattan Leasing. I got in touch with the president and he said, wow, yes, I am missing for 6 years now this orange Gallardo Superleggera. How did you find it? And I explained it to him. He was very impressed. He said, actually, I'll send you a $5,000 finder's fee for locating the car for me. And so I put him in touch with the cops, and they were obviously at that time the local cops to where the dealership was. Were going to set up a sting or a repossession or whatever you'd call it when they were going to go in and get the cars. So I didn't hear much else from the cops for a week or so. I did get in touch with the guys from O'Gara. They were excited to be able to recover their car. And it was odd for a dealership to kind of be the lien holder in a situation like that. But what happens many times is that if somebody doesn't make their first payment or their first 3 payments, in many cases, the legal verbiage and the contracts between the lien holders and the dealerships mean that the dealer actually has to buy out the loan and they have to then go about repossessing the car. That happened to us a few times while I was working at the dealership. And so clearly that's what had happened with the Spider. So the Superleggera would eventually go back to Manhattan Leasing. O'Gara would get the Spider back as soon as the cops could go get the cars. And I actually had a friend in the Alpharetta Police Department that had gone in with everybody to try to get the cars back. And again, I didn't hear from him for like a week after I knew they were going to try to go and get them. And so I called him and I said, hey, well, what happened? And he said, oh man, I'm so sorry. I meant to call you. Everything worked great. Obviously, we found the cars. And I'm like, well, what did he say? How did he get them? What did he pay for them? How much were they worth stolen? And he's like, you know what? We really didn't get into that because in addition to the cars, stuff that you obviously didn't see, in the walls and around, there was a ton of drugs and illegal firearms. He was in so much trouble for all of that. Obviously, we were going to arrest him. Dealing with stolen cars was such a low criminal offense. We didn't really worry about it. Obviously, we've got them. They're in our impound lot. We'll get in touch with these guys and get them their cars back. But this guy's going to go away for a very, very long time. So obviously, I've just learned that I've gotten a much more serious criminal into some trouble trying to buy these 2 cars, and I didn't really know what to expect. But he assured me that I would be okay and that everything was all right and whatever. And so obviously, a year or so goes by. We start the VINwiki YouTube channel the next summer in June of 2017. And one of the first stories that I tell is about recovering these cars. And so after I release it, I send it to him and he immediately calls me. This is my friend in the Alpharetta Police Department. He says, Ed, did you follow the way that case went? And I was like, no, I don't spend a lot of time looking into such things. He said, well, he's out. And I'm like, what do you mean he's out? You arrested him for all this stuff. He said, well, because we had relied on your information to go in, obviously we used the dealership address for the warrants, and somebody just didn't do enough diligence and didn't do enough research and didn't fill things out appropriately. And so the warrants that we used to collect everything were for that unit, but in fact, as you'll recall, you went through some hallways and things, and you actually were in a different unit in this complex, a different address, when you saw the Lamborghinis, and that's where everything else was. And so we executed a search warrant on a property, and walking through open areas, we ended up on another property. And so when we seized all the stuff and when we arrested this guy, we were not where we were supposed to be according to the warrant. And so all of the evidence got thrown out and the guy walked. And I'm like, what? So he's out there, and obviously many people had commented like, oh, Ed, you snitch, you just got this guy in trouble. But in fact, it would appear that I got the guy out of trouble because I did all the police work for these guys, and I told them where stuff was, and it was when you walked through the door of that address, but apparently it was somewhere else. And so even though they got everything they were looking for and a whole lot more, them relying on what I told them is what got this guy off. Now, I've never heard from this guy. I've talked to other people that knew him that kind of recognized the details of the story and obviously recognized some of the cars. And they said after that day, he never came back. They'd heard he moved somewhere out west or something like that. So since then, obviously, I've shared the story with about 4 million people, and I've never heard anything from this guy. So I assume that I'm not going to get killed over my involvement in this whole thing. But the cars did go back to the lien holders. The Superleggera went to Manhattan Leasing. The Spider went to O'Gara. I tried to buy both of them, but both of them thought the cars were worth about $100,000, which I didn't think with the wrong VINs and all the miles and no service and everything that was fair. So I think I offered 45 or 50 grand on each of them, but they didn't decide to take my offer. So I didn't get to buy either of the cars. Since then, they've gone around, they've been posted on VINwiki, each sold a couple of times. The Superleggera is quite visually modified, new front bumpers and graphics and stuff like that. The Spider now has Huracan wheels on it, of all things. But it's so cool to see them out, but these guys probably have no idea, unless they watch VINwiki, exactly how crazy the past of these cars are. Because on Carfax, it clearly shows that the titles were not branded in the new states where these cars were sold, and it's very possible that used car dealers are not properly representing the exact history of these cars. So that's what we want the VINwiki app to do. Now, unfortunately, Manhattan Leasing decided my participation in this was not worth $5,000 to get their $100,000 car back. And so they've never paid me my $5 grand. And I called them out for that in this video. And I also called them out for it in a video I made a few months later, just kind of detailing all the different options for exotic car financing, the leasing companies, the finance companies that you might want to use. And I told people, don't use Manhattan Leasing because they'll tell you one thing and then they won't do it. And in seeing that, and obviously the quality of the content around exotic car financing, the people at Premier Financial Services contacted me and said, hey, have they gotten like mad at you or tried to get you to take the video down? I was like, no, I mean, what I said is all true. They didn't pay me. They said they were going to pay me. I have emails that said they were going to pay me, and they're like, wow, that seems like really bad marketing.